This is absolutely the best time of the year. NBA offseason is here, and we got the NBA trade rumors running rampant. There's talks about James Harden, Russell Westbrook, DeMar DeRozan. I mean, the list just goes on. So I'm gonna be honest with you. Sometimes the NBA offseason is just as exciting as some of the games during the season. But on today's episode, we're gonna be discussing Chris Paul and the Chris Paul trade rumors, because right now, Chris Paul's 1 year in OKC, that could actually be coming to an end as far as his time there, where we've seen him with the Hornets before, we've seen him with the Clippers, we've seen him with the Rockets, and then the 1 year in OKC. Now, where's his next destination? And not only where is he going to go, but where's the best fit? And I think I've kind of narrowed it down to three realistic possibilities. Three teams that I think that not only should teams be looking at Chris Paul, but kind of makes sense as far as a team where he can get them to the playoffs and potentially be able to compete. Now, once again, these are all hypotheticals because in the NBA, you never know exactly how it's going to shake out. I mean, there's always a surprise team that just comes out of nowhere and just kind of opens the cupboard up and makes a deal that just kind of shocks the NBA world. But on today's episode, we're going to dive deep into the three destinations that I think are the best fits for CP3 to land, because to me, I'm gonna be honest with you, I think Chris Paul is one of the top 10 point guards of all time. He's one of the best floor generals the game has ever seen. An elite two-way player. And he showed last year, Chris Paul still got a lot left in the tank. And if he can get with the right team, possibly Chris Paul can have a chance of competing for an NBA championship. Man, let's get into it.
Are you ready?
Welcome back to Journeyballaholic, the best talk show for basketball addicts. I'm your host, General Ballaholic. Now, if you're new on this channel here, you're going to be getting my passionate and in-depth analysis on the hottest NBA and college basketball topics. Listen, I'm a ballaholic, absolutely addicted to basketball, and just like everybody, I got my own opinions. But if you like opinions that are backed by facts, go ahead and hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, but also make sure that you hit that bell notification so that you'll be updated whenever I drop new videos, which is every Monday and Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, we're going to go ahead and dive right into this episode. Chris Paul. Chris Paul trade rumors are going crazy, and there's three teams that I've identified that I think are perfect fits for his style and just the whole roster construction that would be around him. And I think the three teams that I want to talk about, number one, we got to talk about the LA Clippers. We got to talk about the Milwaukee Bucks and the Phoenix Suns. And to me, I think out of one of these three teams is where I think we're going to actually wind up seeing Chris Paul land. So where do you think he fits in? You can go down to the comment section below and let me know where do you think the best fit is. But for me, I think we got to start with the one that's getting the most attention. And to me, that right now is the LA Clippers. There was rumors that was breaking that the Clippers, not only the Clippers, but Kawhi Leonard in particular has reached out to Clippers management to say, listen, go get me that man. Go get me CP3 to run the show over here. You got to understand why that makes a lot of sense. One of the biggest problems for the Clippers last year was the fact that they did not have a legitimate point guard to be able to kind of create shots for Kawhi Leonard and the rest of the team. Like, think about this. Kawhi Leonard, every team he's ever won a championship on, whether that was with San Antonio or even the one year he was in Toronto, he had a legitimate all-star point guard, whether that was Tony Parker or whether that was Kyle Lowry. A guy that could create a shot for himself, but also could get into the teeth of the defense and could be able to create shots for others. That's what the Clippers did not have last year, because think about it. Patrick Beverley, as much as I love Patrick Beverley and I love his mentality and his toughness, Patrick Beverley is like a 3-and-D point guard. He's a guy who's going to play solid defense, but he's really just not, he's going to just kind of stand on the perimeter and kind of hit open shots. He's not really going to penetrate the defense, kind of draw the defense in and kick out to open shooters. That's not really his game. And then when they brought in Lou Williams, who kind of was playing some point guard, even though he's more of a shooting guard, Lou Williams is an ISO scorer. And even with Reggie Jackson, who they brought in mid-season to be that backup point guard, he's a score-first mentality type of guy. So who's that pass first, that guy who's looking to set others up? They just didn't have it. So that's what makes the Chris Paul to the Clippers trade, it makes so much sense. Is you get a guy who, you're not losing anything really on defense when you bring Chris Paul in. Like I said, his defensive IQ is off the chain. And his ability to create easy shots for others, listen man, it's not many floor generals out there in the game today, but just in the game in all of history that are better than CP3. So I love the idea of Chris Paul to the Clippers. However, there are some challenges with that whole situation if Chris Paul's going to wind up going to the Clippers. Now, the obvious challenge to it is just Chris Paul's contract within itself. I mean, he's making scheduled to make about $41.3 million this coming season, and then he's got an option for the following year where he's making about $44 million. So Chris Paul, you gotta pay homage, and I think, over his years, he's kind of earned that type of a contract, but it does limit the teams that will be able to actually legitimately trade for him, because it's just a high salary that typically is going to require so many different pieces that a team has to trade out just to be able to get him. So if the OKC Thunder are looking to trade Chris Paul, which the rumors are kind of seem like this is a legitimate trade possibility where Chris Paul could be on the move, what would they be looking for? And I think one of the things that I think is an absolute must in any deal is an expiring contract. I think the OKC Thunder, they want to get draft picks, they want to get young players, and they want to get expiring contracts so that they can free up cap space and get out of that $44 million for next year under Chris Paul and be able to become a potential free agent destination. I mean, they got a lot of young pieces over there themselves, and they got some expiring contracts as well. So the OKC Thunder are setting themselves up for a legitimate future with all those picks that they got from the Clippers last year for Paul George, and now potentially trying to get some more assets for Chris Paul. So what would something like that look like? And I think it has to start with the foundation of a Patrick Beverley. Patrick Beverley right now, he's making about $13.3 million, and I think you have to send his contract out. Like I said, that kind of just gets rid of that starting point guard, just kind of a swap out with those two. But then you got to send out more than that $13 million contract that Beverley has. And I think the next most obvious choice would be Lou Williams. Lou Williams is a ball-dominant player that if you bring Chris Paul over there, you really have no need for a Beverley or Lou Williams. I mean, you're pretty much setting up a system where you got Chris Paul, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and so you're getting rid of Lou Williams makes a lot of sense. Also, Lou Williams has an $8 million contract this year, but it's an expiring contract. So the OKC Thunder will be getting a legitimate sixth man of the year, which they already have somebody like that in Dennis Schroeder, but they're getting Lou Williams primarily for that expiring contract. And then also I think you kind of throw in like a young piece like a Landry Shaman who can be a legitimate shooting guard, whether coming off the bench, whether starting. He can be somebody that can be a legitimate floor spacer for the OKC Thunder. And he's relatively still young, so he's got some more upside to his career. Maybe there's some second round picks thrown in, because as we can't forget, the Clippers gave away all their first round picks just getting Paul George. So a package of a Lou Williams, a Patrick Beverley, and a Landry Shaman. Maybe you have to throw in a Zubac. Maybe the OKC Thunder say, okay, well, listen, since we have Steven Adams, who's on an expired contract himself, maybe we want that young big man over there to kind of potentially replace Steven Adams in the future. I don't know. Zubac's contract is roughly, I think, about $7 million. So the Clippers could be potentially losing 3 to 4 players to bring in Chris Paul. So the question is it worth it? To me, absolutely. The Clippers will not win a championship if you bring back the same team they had last year. It's just not going to happen. And Chris Paul being able to come over there and run that ship. And remember, they made a coaching change. So now the head coaches are point guard-minded, leader-minded type guys when you got Tyronn Lue, when you've got Chauncey Billups on that sideline. So these guys right here, I think they would fit perfectly with Chris Paul and his mentality. And I think it would help to maximize Kawhi Leonard's game. It would also help to maximize Paul George, because Paul George, to me, he really didn't fit with the roster around him, because there was just too many ISO guys. But if you put the ball in Chris Paul's hand, he's able to create shots for these guys. And I think that will make them more efficient. And once again, you're not losing anything from the defensive standpoint. So that's the first trade that I think that if you're going to trade Chris Paul, I think it makes sense from the Clippers standpoint to get him. But I can see it making some sense from the OKC Thunder. Ideally, it's not the best destination for the Thunder. And you got to remember, if you're going to make these trade scenarios, it's got to make sense for both teams. So even though I love this idea for the Clippers, it doesn't make as much sense for the Thunder, because once again, they're not getting a first round pick. And out of the young guys that I named, whether it's Landry Shaman or even a potential Zubac, you're really not getting a legitimate young guy. Zubac, I like him. I'm not going to lie. I think he's probably the best young prospect of that Clipper core that would be in that trade. Patrick Beverley, like I said, he wouldn't, he's not really much, especially when you have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and you have Dennis Schroeder. And then, like I said, throwing in Lou Williams, that's really mainly just for an expiring contract, because you have Schroeder, who's that sixth man, who's still that younger type of version of what Lou Williams brings. So that would be that first potential trade. But let's move on to the second trade, which I think would be another ideal situation for Chris Paul, because once again, he's joining a contender, and that's what everybody wants to see. We love the story of Chris Paul and OKC last year. But we want to see Chris Paul on a contender competing for a potential championship, at least getting to the conference finals, somewhere that he's never been in his entire, getting to the finals, somewhere he's never been in his entire career. So that's what we want to see from Chris Paul. And I think the second option would be the Milwaukee Bucks. To me, the Bucks make so much sense. You put Chris Paul with Giannis Antetokounmpo, man, that right there just opens up his game. You think it opens up Kawhi's game? It opens up Giannis' game so much, because what the Milwaukee Bucks have right now with Eric Bledsoe running point, it's not sufficient. Eric Bledsoe is another one of those scoring type point guards. He's a legitimate defender, so he's like an upgraded version of Patrick Beverley, but he can create more of a shot for himself, and like I said, he's just a better version of Patrick Beverley, to be honest with you. But he's not Chris Paul. And Chris Paul's ability to create shots and to take the ball out of Giannis' hand, that's the most important thing. Take the ball out of Giannis' hand and allow Giannis to be a finisher and less of a playmaker. It truly will speak volumes for how the trajectory of Giannis Antetokounmpo's career. Now, a package that the Milwaukee Bucks, I think, that makes a lot of sense would be to send Eric Bledsoe and to send his contract out there. He's making about $16.8 million, so you got to include him. Like I said, because you got so much salary that Chris Paul is bringing in. But then expiring contract. Ilyasova is making about $7 million on the expiring contract. Go ahead and get rid of his contract. And then you also have Brook Lopez. Brook Lopez right now, I think, would be a legitimate fit with this OKC Thunder. I'm be honest with you, Brook Lopez is a legitimate fit on most teams. I mean, how many guys out there in the NBA are a legitimate 7 feet, they're a legitimate three-point shooter, and they're a legitimate rim protector? It's not many guys like that. So I think those three would be like the core of that. You may have to throw in, like, say, some picks and maybe even a DiVincenzo, some young prospect that they may want. But the biggest problem with this trade, even though I love it from the Milwaukee standpoint, because they would get a legitimate floor general to go with Chris Middleton and Giannis to give them that big three that they need, I just don't see Milwaukee doing this deal. And the reason I don't see Milwaukee doing this deal is because you're going to give up basically everything to try to keep Giannis. But Chris Paul is not necessarily the perfect age to mesh with Giannis, right? Giannis he wants to win, and he wants to win now. And a slightly younger point guard, but even less important about the age, that contract would cripple the Bucks, where this is a go all in and it's gotta work deal. And if you don't win next year with Chris Paul, I would just see Giannis just walking out the front door saying, well, there's no way we're gonna get better, where Chris Paul has a $44 million contract the following season. I would see him leaving. So for the Milwaukee Bucks, that's a big gamble. And we've also kind of already heard some rumblings where the Milwaukee Bucks may not necessarily want to do that deal. Personally, I think it would be a great fit. I think for Chris Paul's career, it would be perfect for him. I think that the Bucks being able to get an expiring contract, the Thunder being able to get an expiring contract, being able to get a legitimate big man, and being able to get Eric Bledsoe, which Eric Bledsoe is not necessarily the best fit for that OKC Thunder team, but I like the situation where for both teams. But it's not the best fit. I'm going to be honest with you. The best fit for Chris Paul to get traded to this offseason, it's got to be the Phoenix Suns. It has to be the Phoenix Suns. When I heard the interest that the Phoenix Suns had in Chris Paul, it was just like ding, 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 ding. It made too much sense. The bells went off. It makes too much sense for that team and that player. Think about this for a second. One of the things they tried to do with bringing Ricky Rubio over there was to take the ball out of Devin Booker's hands. And we saw it kind of work. I mean, listen, you don't forget, that Phoenix Suns team, they went 8-0 in the bubble. And that Devin Booker, man, he showed he's a potential superstar. This kid's game is only going to get better. And I think having a guy like Ricky Rubio helped to take the pressure off of Booker and helped to make the game easier for him. But imagine what Chris Paul could do for Booker's game. Imagine what Chris Paul could do for DeAndre Ayton's game. We saw what Chris Paul did for DeAndre Jordan, right? And how he helped Blake Griffin out. Lob City. Imagine DeAndre Ayton, who could play inside, outside. He can get on that box. He can play that pick and roll. Man, pick and pop. Like, DeAndre Ayton's game would get better. Devin Booker would have somebody setting him up. He would have somebody taking that pressure off him. And I think a lot of people don't understand this about Chris Paul. He's one of the most clutch players in the NBA, bar none. I'm not saying the most clutch, but he's got to be top 2, top 3 clutch players in the game today. So you put him with a clutch Devin Booker. That backcourt right there would be absolutely sensational. But it does come at a price. You're going to have to give up something to get something. And the Phoenix Suns, the way they ended that season, going 8-0 in that bubble, they want to make the playoffs. And we just saw how Chris Paul was able to go to an OKC team where nobody picked the OKC Thunder to make the playoffs last year. You put Chris Paul with Devin Booker on that Phoenix Suns team, they're in the playoffs next year. They're in the play, and that's what you want. You want your young guys getting quality minutes during quality time. Those 8 games that we saw from Devin Booker were the most important games of his entire career. And he played on a level, on a superstar level, basically. He played on that kind of a level. So we've seen him kind of under the bright lights, and I think he's ready for it. And I think they want to give him more of that. And I think the Phoenix Suns are willing and ready to go all in right now to make this happen. It would be the perfect scenario. Now, granted, Chris Paul, if he goes to the Phoenix Suns, that's not a contender. They're not going to win a championship. So if he goes to the Clippers or if he goes to the Bucks, that's a better situation, I think, for Chris Paul to end his career, right? But I don't think Chris Paul is necessarily ready to end his career right now. And I think he would, like I say, not only would he make those young guys around him better, I think that Phoenix Suns team would be an amazing team that could potentially compete for a top 5 or 6 seed in the West. And the West is absolutely loaded when you talk about the Golden State Warriors, the Lakers, the Clippers, the Nuggets, the Rockets, the Jazz. Like, the West is loaded. So if they can make the playoffs, that's major, man. So what would a package look like for the Phoenix Suns to be able to acquire him? Well, one of the guys I think that are just kind of one of the most underrated players in the game is Kelly Oubre. And I think he would have to be included in that deal. Think about this. Kelly Oubre, he's got that expiring contract, right? About $14.3 million. You look at a guy like Ricky Rubio, he's got to go in that deal. $17 million is really need to keep him. So those two right there are going to be the key pieces around a Chris Paul trade. But then you also probably have to throw in another expiring contract, which they have with Frank Kaminsky, about $5 million. So they could, and they have a pick that they could throw in there. So when you want to talk about what the OKC Thunder would be getting out of this, I think that's the best package that the Thunder could receive, where you're getting a young player like Oubre. You're getting a draft pick, a legitimate draft pick, and then you could also get not one, but multiple expiring contracts, where between Kelly Oubre and Frank Kaminsky, you're talking about $19 million of expiring contract between those two. So that's a major incentive to do that deal right there with those teams and those players. So I don't know about you, man, but for me, I would love to see Chris Paul in any one of these 3 situations. I think if he goes to the Clippers, it makes the storylines are just bananas. First of all, he's going back to the Clippers where he's already played, and he's doing it where the Clippers would become, they would become probably the favorites. I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. As a Laker fan, I would have to say, if they get Chris Paul and they're able to keep Paul George with Kawhi Leonard, they're right there with the Lakers. Like, they're right there neck and neck with the Lakers. If he goes to Milwaukee, I think Milwaukee Bucks become the favorites to come out the East. Because you got to remember, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving are back, and the East is going to be loaded. You got the Miami Heat. Like, the East is loaded. So the Bucks got to add somebody. And if they get Chris Paul, to me, they become the favorite to come out of the East. If he goes to the Phoenix Suns, I think it's the best case to unlock the best ability of a Devin Booker and a DeAndre Ayton, and you could potentially see a dark horse team in the Phoenix Suns. So what do you think? Go down to the comment section below. Let me know which of these 3 teams do you think is the best fit for Chris Paul. What do you think is the most realistic potential opportunity for him to actually get traded to? Let me know in the comment section below, man. Listen, I appreciate you for taking a look at this video. If you haven't joined my members only section, we got a new members only section. We're doing live Q&A sessions where you can ask questions. We're gonna be talking all things basketball, and I got a new cooking show. It's called Cooking with the General, where I'm prepping, I'm cooking, and we're gonna be talking NBA all season. Listen, training camp starts at December 1st, and then the season is December 26th. So we're about maybe less than 40 days from the start of the NBA season. So go ahead, make sure you hit that join now button, sign up for one of those 2 packages. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe to the channel now. And if you missed any of my previous videos, go ahead and click the box right here. Until next time, make sure that y'all stay safe in the streets. And remember, we still demand justice for Breonna Taylor and Jacob Blake. Peace.